As I remember, this story began when I was only 7 or 8 years old. Back in my village, I used to play with Ben and Leo because not only were their houses next to mine, but we also got along very well. We often played by a pond, which was at the far end of the village, near the edge of the forest. One day, as soon as we got to the pond, we heard strange sounds coming from it, and we saw a lot of frogs, so we walked closer. Since we were young, we decided to throw stones at them. Watching the frightened frogs jump away, we laughed excitedly. Meanwhile, Ben was looking at something below the water, maybe because he didn't want to play our boring game. When I tried to throw a stone again, Ben told me to stop. He thought he saw a big fish underneath the water. When we looked down into the pond, we saw a fish swimming around a big, strange rock. It was the first time we saw this fish, or any fish for that matter. So we decided to get into the pond to take a closer look. But while we were about to jump into the pond, it suddenly started to rain, heavily. We were all surprised, because the day had quickly turned from a nice sunny day into a dark, stormy one. So we decided to run straight back home. That whole day, the rain kept falling. We stayed inside, for we couldn't do anything else in that weather. After the rain had passed, the air became cleaner, so we started our day as usual. Strangely, we felt uneasy, which seldom happened to us. The first person to get that feeling was Leo. He mentioned that he had a nightmare the previous night. Ben was next to comment about last night's dream. He made a serious and then awkward face. He had also had a nightmare that night. Leo believed that these bad dreams were because of the rain soaking us by the pond. But Ben disagreed. He stared into space with a blank expression. Then he said, "I dreamt of ghosts. It felt very real." I turned to look at Ben to ask him more about his nightmare. He quickly narrated what he had experienced in his dream the previous night. While trying to sleep, he got the urge to go to the bathroom. Half asleep, he got out of bed and went straight into the bathroom. Suddenly, as he reached for the toilet door, he felt a cold wind rush through his body. Ben was astonished when he saw what appeared to be a person coming out of the toilet. The person appeared gradually and became more visible. Ben panicked and shouted in horror. It was himself, or someone that looked like him. He froze in shock and was sure this would be the day he died. As he continued to observe the surreal event, the shadow walked past him. And, as it did, he felt clearly the eeriness and coldness coming from that weird entity. Then, slowly, the shadow moved into Ben's bedroom. He panicked, and his face turned pale from the fright. Composing himself, he decided to use the toilet first. Maybe it was just an hallucination, he thought. The next morning, before going to school, he wondered whether he should tell his parents what he had witnessed the night before. After thinking for a while, he decided to tell his parents about this figure that appeared in his bedroom last night. When his mother heard the story, she looked annoyed. She said, "Ben, you have watched too many horror movies. You are obsessed with them." Discouraged and unconvinced, He then said goodbye to his mother and went to school. After Ben had finished telling his story to us, I wondered why I didn't see anything strange like that. We were so caught up in our conversation that we didn't realize we had arrived at school already. That day at school was a tough one. I couldn't stop thinking about Ben's story. It was just so weird. During class, he kept yawning and falling asleep. He showed signs of sleep deprivation. In the late afternoon, the three of us were on our way back home after school. On the way home, we met a woman who was holding a little boy in her arms. As soon as the boy saw us, he pointed at Ben and cried out loud. Startled, we looked at the little boy, then quickly looked at Ben in confusion. I wondered why the child had looked at my friend and screamed. But Leo chuckled and patted Ben's shoulder. He said that maybe Ben's face was too fierce, and this had probably scared the child to tears. On the way home that day, we had to cross an alley that was quite empty. Suddenly, a dog jumped out and barked at us. He stared at Ben and growled. His eyes turned red and looked very ferocious. We became frightened. Our faces turned pale. We didn't know what to do. At that moment, I shouted, "Run!" So we immediately ran as fast as possible. After that day, Leo and I came back to check the dog out again. It was clear that the strange dog was only barking at Ben, and he didn't behave the same way when we went back. I knew Ben seemed to realize that too. His face expressed obvious concern. The next day, we ran straight to the pond which we had visited the day before. The place looked different after the rain. The air was cooler and clearer this time. When I looked at the bank of the pond, I was surprised. It seemed like something had changed. I pointed to the water and told my friends about it. Under the water, the rocks, which we had seen the day before, were gone. Instead, large pieces of wood, which had probably come from the bottom of the pond, were floating. Maybe yesterday's rain caused the water in the pond to rise up. Suddenly, Ben called us and pointed towards something which was drifting in the water. I turned back to see what it was. It was an old, damp piece of wood. There were 2 frogs sitting on it. They reminded us about the frogs that had been on the rocks the day before. Then Ben asked Leo to help him explore the piece of wood with him. Why had it appeared near this pond? They jumped on it. Then they imagined they were on a boat and started using a long branch as a paddle to row. Ben asked me to join them. He looked very enthusiastic. They immediately took the other branch to push their boat away from the bank. Suddenly, the boat turned and leaned to one side, which caused Ben to fall into the water. Leo was also startled and couldn't keep his balance, so fell too. While watching, I panicked. I saw Leo swim up from the water. His body was all wet. He tried to cling onto a piece of wood in front of him and gasped for breath. It was very hard for me to pull Leo out of the pond, but at last I did. Normally, this pond was quite shallow. Why did it seem so deep that day? Leo choked on water, but managed to tell me that he couldn't see Ben anywhere. I ran towards the pond and called for Ben in panic, but the water was very calm, as if nothing had happened just moments before. Everyone in the village went to this pond together to look for Ben after hearing the commotion. This pond was very shallow now, and strangely, not a trace of Ben could be found. The big piece of wood was also brought out of the pond. Some soil was still stuck to it. The log was moldy and slippery, and it seemed that was why they slipped. The villagers decided to bring pumps. They plugged the pipe to suck up all the water in the pond. There were about 3 or 4 pumps which worked at full capacity until the job was done. It took more than half a day for all the pumps to drain the water. Once drained, at the bottom of the pond, people found a large wooden coffin. All the villagers were instantly terrified. The coffin was upside down, but people realized immediately that the piece of wood was the lid of the coffin. Some strong young men stepped forward and used their strength to turn the coffin up. However, because of the dirt stuck to it on the bottom, it was extremely difficult to lift. After a while, they managed to overturn the coffin to its side. Everyone panicked because there was a body inside that resembled one of a child. I saw then that it was my friend Ben. Everyone looked at each other with tearful eyes. It turned out that the reason why Ben's body did not emerge was because it was stuck in this coffin. No one knows how it happened, but many can imagine that it must have been something terrible and supernatural that held him down. After Ben's demise, everyone immediately spread the word, and no one dared to come to this pond ever again. It later turned into a large trash hole.